"Don't go upstairs, Mom. It's messy," Eric said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was such an odd thing to say. I'd raised 2 children in a 2-bedroom farmhouse and had seen every kind of mess imaginable. Toys scattered like landmines, socks balled under the couch, muddy boots left in hallways. There was no mess I couldn't face. But something in his voice, the quick way his wife glanced at him and then away, caught in my mind like a burr on wool. I stood in their hallway, my coat still buttoned, clutching the basket of cinnamon rolls I'd baked that morning. The smell of them was the only warm thing in that house just then. Eric stepped closer, guiding me toward the kitchen with a hand on my elbow. "It's really not worth going up," he added lightly. "The kids have turned it into a fort. Blankets, chairs, chaos. We'll keep to the kitchen." I nodded, though I wasn't convinced. His new house had been my gift, or more precisely, my money's gift. 2 years ago, when Eric and Julia found the perfect place but needed just a little help with the down payment, I'd written a check large enough to cover nearly a third of it. I told myself it was for family gatherings, for my grandchildren's future, for the comfort of knowing my son had a home. But I'd been in that home fewer than 10 times. Julia always had a reason. The kids had homework. They were about to leave. The house was too chaotic. I told myself not to take it personally. Now, as I sat at their spotless kitchen table, sipping lukewarm coffee and listening to Julia list her new business expenses, I couldn't shake the thought of the upstairs. It wasn't that I cared about a mess of toys. It was the sharp, almost nervous edge in Eric's voice when he'd stopped me. When Julia left to take a call, I tried to focus on my coffee, but my gaze kept drifting toward the staircase. The door to the upstairs hallway was half closed. From where I sat, I could see the bottom 2 steps in perfect order. No blanket forts, no scattered Lego bricks. Eric noticed my glance and shifted in his seat. "So, Mom," he said, a little too brightly, "how's the garden holding up this year?" "About the same," I said. "A little thin on the roses. But you know," I let my words trail off and took another sip. His eyes darted once toward the stairs. That was when I knew. Whatever was up there, it wasn't a blanket fort. The strange thing was, my mind didn't immediately jump to theft or betrayal. I wanted to believe in my son's goodness. But the truth is, when you've lived 70 years, you learn to recognize a lie by the way it tries to smile at you. And Eric's smile was wearing thin. The conversation limped along after that, as if both of us were walking on a frozen pond, afraid of the cracks we could hear beneath our feet. Julia returned, her phone pressed to her ear, whispering something sharp and hurried to whoever was on the other end. She slipped past me without making eye contact and disappeared into the pantry, shutting the door behind her. I looked at my hands wrapped around the coffee cup. They weren't as steady as they used to be, and the skin was thinner now, the veins more visible. But they'd carried laundry baskets up and down stairs for decades, hauled groceries through snowstorms, tended gardens under August heat. They'd worked, and they'd built. That house upstairs, whatever was in it, had been made possible by these hands. From somewhere above came a faint thud, like a door closing. Too heavy for a child, too deliberate. "Kids playing?" I asked. Eric glanced upward. "Yeah, they're reorganizing their toys," he said, his tone light but his shoulders tightening. "You know how it is." I did know, and I also knew there was something wrong in the way he said it. When Julia reappeared, she was all smiles. "Eric, could you help me move the boxes in the garage?" Mom can relax here." She put a gentle hand on my shoulder, the way people do with strangers in hospital waiting rooms. They left together through the back door, their voices fading, their footsteps crunching on the driveway gravel. The kitchen fell silent, and that silence gave me my answer. Whatever was upstairs, they didn't want me to see, and they'd both stepped outside. I rose slowly, setting my coffee cup down without a sound. My knees ached, but I moved toward the staircase anyway. Each step felt like peeling away a layer of pretense, of years spent convincing myself that distance was just busyness, not something colder. The upstairs hallway smelled faintly of cedar, the scent of the built-in closet at the far end. I passed the children's rooms, neatly made beds, nothing that spoke of chaos or forts. At the end of the hall, Eric's office door stood ajar. And there, against the far wall, was the safe. The door hung open. From the doorway, I could see the empty shelves inside, a dust shadow where my mother's pearl brooch had once rested, the bare metal where my documents should have been stacked. My heart thudded, slow and heavy. It wasn't messy upstairs at all. It was stripped. I stepped closer, almost afraid to breathe. The faint scent of metal and dust drifted from the open safe, like the smell of a room long closed. It used to be full, not of gold bars or mountains of cash, but of my life's milestones. The deed to my little cottage. The envelope with my will, updated after Harold died. A narrow velvet box that held my mother's pearls, the only thing she'd been able to pass down to me after a lifetime of scraping by. And there had been a thick envelope of savings. Not everything I had, but enough to keep me from sleepless nights. I remembered the last time I'd opened it, nearly 6 months ago, to tuck in the birth certificates of Eric's children for safekeeping. He'd stood beside me that day, chatting idly, his eyes flicking toward the stack of envelopes more than once. I hadn't thought anything of it. He was my son. You don't suspect your own child. Now there was nothing, not a paperclip, not even the familiar weight of the old brass key I'd kept on the top shelf. I reached out, touching the cold metal interior, as if maybe the memories could still be hiding there, tucked into some invisible seam. But it was as empty as the hallway behind me. My pulse pounded in my ears, but my thoughts were surprisingly clear. Whoever had opened that safe had done it carefully. There was no damage to the lock, no sign of a break-in. That meant one thing. Someone had the key, or the combination. Someone I'd trusted. I turned, scanning the room. Eric's desk sat in its usual neatness, papers stacked, pens in their holder, but the top drawer was slightly ajar. Inside, I saw the edge of a folded sheet of paper. My combination, in my own handwriting. I'd given it to him last winter when I'd been down with the flu and he'd offered to fetch some documents for me. I'd thanked him for being so helpful. Now, standing in his quiet office, I felt that thank you turn to ash in my mouth. Downstairs, the back door banged shut. Their voices carried faintly up the staircase, closer now. I took one last look at the empty safe, then closed its door gently, the way you might pull a blanket over someone who's already gone. By the time I reached the bottom of the stairs, I had already decided there would be no confrontation today. Not yet. I've lived long enough to know that when you've been blindsided, the first words you say can be your weakest. And I wasn't going to give Eric and Julia the satisfaction of seeing me rattled, blurting questions they could wriggle out of. So when they came back in through the kitchen door, dust on their sleeves from the garage, I was standing by the sink, rinsing my coffee cup. "Find everything you needed?" I asked, as if nothing in the world had changed in the last 10 minutes. Eric nodded. Yeah, thanks. Julia's got those boxes sorted now. Sorry to leave you alone. I smiled. The kind of smile you give to people you've already started locking out of your life. It's fine. I was just enjoying the quiet. Julia moved past me to the refrigerator, humming under her breath, and I caught the faintest sideways glance from her to Eric. It told me two things. She knew, and she was waiting to see if I did. I left not long after, my cinnamon rolls still in their basket, because Julia had already made dessert for the kids. In the driveway, Eric hugged me stiffly, his chin just brushing the top of my head. Drive safe, Mom. Safe. The word clanged in my ears all the way home. My little cottage felt different when I unlocked the door. The air seemed stiller, the rooms quieter. But maybe that was just me, carrying this new, sharp-edged awareness through them. I set the untouched cinnamon rolls on the counter and went straight to my own desk. The first thing I checked was the small, fireproof box in the bottom drawer. My passport was still there. So was the spare checkbook, but the envelope with the last 2 years' worth of bank statements was gone. I know, because I keep things in neat piles, and the gap was as plain as a missing tooth. I sat down slowly. If Eric had taken documents from here and emptied the safe, then he'd already been in my house without my knowledge, and not once, but at least twice. The phone sat on the corner of my desk, the bank's number already in my contacts. I pressed it before I could talk myself out of it. Good afternoon, Mrs. Lawson, the manager, Susan, said when she recognized my voice. How can I help you today? I need to know if there's been any unusual activity on my accounts in the last month, I said. My voice was steady, but I kept my other hand pressed against my knee to stop the trembling. There was a pause, the sound of keys tapping. Well, I do see a few attempted transfers flagged by our security system. They were blocked for verification because the access request came from a new device. One was for $8,000, another for $15,000. When? 3 days ago and last week Tuesday. I let out a slow breath. 3 days ago, Eric had come by just to drop off some soup because Julia thought I'd sounded tired on the phone. Last Tuesday, he'd borrowed my car to save me the trouble of driving to my medical appointment. Mrs. Lawson, Susan said gently, would you like me to put a temporary freeze on your accounts until we can meet in person? Yes, I said without hesitation. Freeze everything, and I want to revoke the power of attorney my son has on file. Effective immediately. Another pause. Of course, I'll start that process now, but you'll need to come in to sign documents for the permanent change. I'll be there when you open tomorrow. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, looking at my hands again. They'd just made one of the hardest phone calls of my life. Harder than telling people Harold was gone. Harder than signing the papers to sell the family farm. Because this time, I was choosing to close a door on my own child. The late afternoon light slanted across the room, catching the photo of Eric at 6 years old, missing his front teeth, grinning up at the camera while holding a frog in both hands. I remembered drying that frog with one of my good tea towels because he'd insisted it was cold and needed a blanket. I felt the sting behind my eyes, but I didn't let the tears fall. That little boy was gone. The man who'd replaced him had looked me in the eye today and told me not to go upstairs. And I had, and found my safe as empty as the space where trust should have been. I stood, locking the fireproof box and sliding the key into my pocket. Tonight, I would make lists of accounts, assets, documents, and anything else that still belonged to me. And tomorrow morning, I'd start making sure it stayed that way. I barely slept that night. Not from the usual aches in my hips or the creak of the old house in the wind, but from the rhythm of my own thoughts. Steady, relentless, like a clock ticking down to morning. By 6, I was dressed and ready, my handbag packed with every form of identification I owned. I'd also tucked in the small spiral notebook I'd kept for years, where I'd written down major expenses. Looking at the entries from the past decade had been like flipping through a ledger of blind faith. Checks for Eric's emergency car repairs, the down payment on the house, contributions toward his business idea that fizzled out in less than 6 months. The bank opened at 9, but I arrived 20 minutes early. The parking lot was still half empty, a few employees unlocking the side door. When Susan, the branch manager, saw me through the glass, she came at once to let me in. "I've already prepared the paperwork to freeze your accounts and remove the power of attorney," she said, leading me into her office. "But I'll need you to review and initial every page." The pen felt heavier than it should as I signed. Each stroke was a small severing, not from the money itself, but from the years I'd believed it was a bridge between me and my son. When we were finished, Susan leaned forward. "Do you want to add any security measures? 2-step verification, a change of address for statements, maybe even a new set of account numbers?" "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "All of it. And I want any in-person requests for my accounts to require my physical presence. No exceptions." Her eyes softened. "Understood." From there, I walked 2 blocks to my attorney's office. Michael Daniels had been handling my affairs since Harold passed. He greeted me with a puzzled smile. "Martha, you look like you've been up all night. What's going on?" I sat down across from him and told him everything: the safe, the missing contents, the attempted transfers. He didn't interrupt, but his jaw tightened. "We'll need to revise your will," he said when I finished, "and I strongly suggest setting up a living trust for your assets. It'll keep them out of reach unless you authorize access, and it's harder to challenge than a will." He pulled out forms, explaining each step. We discussed removing Eric entirely as an executor and replacing him with a neutral third party. We also added a clause. Any relative who contested my estate would forfeit their inheritance. It was all business, but beneath it ran a quiet current of something heavier. This wasn't just legal housekeeping. This was dismantling the trust I'd spent a lifetime building. When the documents were drafted for my signature later that week, Michael said gently, "I know this isn't easy." "No," I said, meeting his gaze, "but it's necessary. And at my age, you stop putting off what's necessary." Back home, I set the new keys and passwords in a small envelope and slid it into the bottom of my sewing box, a place no one but me ever touched. Then I made tea and sat by the kitchen window, watching the sparrows dart between the hedges. The phone rang twice that afternoon. Both times the caller ID showed Eric's number. I let it go to voicemail. His voice, tense and too quick, spilled out. "Mom, we need to talk. Call me back, please." Please. I wondered if that word would have come so easily if the safe had been full, the account still open. I wrapped my hands around my teacup, letting the warmth seep in. The ache in my chest was still there, but it was no longer a hollow ache. It was filling with something steadier. Resolve. It was late Saturday morning when the knock came. 3 quick raps, then a pause. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I thought it might be Eric, ready to barge in with his explanations. But when I opened the door, it was Chloe, my oldest granddaughter. She stood there holding a paper bag from the bakery, her hair pulled into a messy bun, a pink scarf looped around her neck. Hi, Grandma, she said, her smile warm but a little uncertain. I brought you those scones you like. I stepped aside to let her in. What's the occasion? She shrugged, setting the bag on the counter. No occasion. I just wanted to see you. We made tea together, moving around each other in the small kitchen as easily as if she'd grown up there. Which, in a way, she had. When she was little, I'd watch her after school, teaching her how to braid dough for challah, or letting her sprinkle cinnamon sugar on pies. Once we were seated at the table, she looked down at her mug and said quietly, "Dad's not happy." I stirred my tea slowly. I imagine he's not. He said you've made some changes. With the bank. And other things. That's right. She bit her lip. He wouldn't tell me exactly what happened, but I can tell he's upset. And Julia. Chloe stopped herself, glancing at me. Well, she's been making little comments about you being stubborn, about you not trusting them. I met her gaze. Do you think I'm being stubborn, Chloe? Her answer came without hesitation. No, I think you've been too trusting for too long. For a moment, I had to look away. It wasn't anger that stung. It was relief. Someone in that house saw me clearly. I don't know the details, she went on, and you don't have to tell me. But I just wanted you to know I'm on your side. I know how much you've done for all of us. I reached across the table and took her hand. You're the only one who's said that in a very long time. She squeezed my fingers. I've seen it, Grandma. I've seen the way you've helped and how it's taken for granted. You don't deserve that. We talked for nearly an hour about her classes, her friends, the apartment she hoped to rent after graduation. Not once did she ask for anything. Not once did she hint at needing money. When she left, she hugged me tighter than usual. Call me if you need anything. Anything, okay? After she was gone, the house felt different than it had all week. The betrayal was still there, sharp as ever. But now there was something else layered over it. A quiet reminder that not all ties in a family are rotten. Some are worth holding on to. By Monday morning, the phone had become a stubborn, buzzing reminder that Eric wasn't used to waiting for answers. The first call came at 8:12 a.m., before I'd even finished my toast. I let it ring. At 8:17, another. Then 8:25. By 9, I'd counted 7 missed calls and 3 voicemails. The most recent one was tight-voiced and clipped. Mom, I don't know what's going on, but we need to clear this up before things get out of hand. Call me back. Clear this up. As if it were a spilled cup of coffee between us, instead of an emptied safe and attempted theft. I took my tea into the living room and left the phone on the kitchen counter, where its vibration couldn't reach me. Outside, the first real snow of the season was falling, the flakes catching on the bare branches like tiny flags. By mid-morning, Julia's name appeared on the screen. I didn't answer. A minute later came a text. We can explain. Please give us a chance before you do something we'll all regret. There was something almost amusing in the assumption that I hadn't already done something, but I didn't reply. At 11 the landline rang, the one hardly anyone uses anymore. For a second, I considered answering, thinking it might be Chloe. But it was Eric again. Mom, please, his voice urged the answering machine. You're making a mistake. We love you. Whatever you think happened, you're wrong. Let's just talk, okay? I can come over right now. I sat perfectly still, listening to his words echo in the quiet. Love, he'd said. The same word he'd used when I signed the check for his house, for his second car, for his temporary business loan. Love wrapped around a request, like ribbon around an empty box. Around noon, I walked to the hall closet and pulled out my coat. If they wanted to find me at home, they'd be disappointed. I had no destination in mind, just the need to breathe air that wasn't heavy with their voices. The cold was bracing. I walked 3 blocks to the small park, where the benches were dusted with snow and the pond lay still under a thin layer of ice. A young couple passed me, laughing, their breath clouding in the air. I wondered if they had any idea how quickly warmth could turn to cold between people who once promised each other everything. When I returned, the red light on the answering machine was blinking furiously. 12 new messages. I didn't play them. Instead, I went into the kitchen and opened the small drawer by the sink, the one where I kept spare keys. Harold's old habit. Never put all your trust in one lock, he used to say. I sifted through until I found the key to the shed out back. The shed was musty and cold, but it still smelled faintly of cedar from the shelves Harold had built. On the top shelf, behind a box of old canning jars, sat a smaller lockbox, one Eric didn't know about. Inside was a stack of photographs, a few pieces of jewelry that had never been in the house safe, and a short list of my most important account numbers and contacts. I ran my fingers over the pearl earrings, cool and smooth, and felt the faintest easing in my chest. He hadn't taken everything. He didn't even know about these. Back inside, the phone started again. I stood in the kitchen, watching it buzz on the counter, until it finally went still. I knew this silence wouldn't last. Sooner or later, Eric would stop circling and come straight at me. And when he did, I would be ready. It was Thursday afternoon when the knock came. Not a tentative tap, but a steady, deliberate rhythm. The kind of knock that says, I know you're in there, and I'm not leaving. I opened the door to find Eric on the porch. Snowflakes caught in his dark hair, his jaw tight. He wasn't alone. Julia stood behind him, bundled in a pale wool coat, her lips pressed into a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mom, Eric said, we need to talk. I stepped back, wordlessly letting them in. My house felt smaller with them inside, their presence crowding the air. Eric paced to the living room, Julia trailing behind, glancing around like she was taking inventory. Eric didn't sit. You've been avoiding our calls. Yes, I said evenly. He stopped pacing. Why? I gestured toward the couch. If you have something to say, you might as well be comfortable. Reluctantly, they sat. Julia smoothed her coat, then folded her hands neatly in her lap. Eric leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We heard from the bank. You froze your accounts. You revoked my power of attorney. That's... He exhaled sharply. That's extreme, Mom. Is it? I asked. Yes, Julia cut in, her voice cool. And it makes it look like you don't trust us. I met her gaze. Should I? Eric shifted. This is about the safe, isn't it? I said nothing, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Eric's voice softened. Mom, you must have misunderstood. I went into the safe because we needed the insurance papers for the house. I didn't take anything else. My eyes didn't leave his. Then where are my mother's pearls? He blinked. I don't know. Maybe you moved them? And the bank statements from my desk? His jaw tightened. You're remembering wrong. Julia leaned forward, her tone suddenly syrupy. Martha, stress can make us forget things. Maybe you misplaced them. Let's not turn this into something ugly over a misunderstanding. I let out a breath, slow and steady. A misunderstanding is when someone forgets to bring milk home. This is theft. Eric's voice rose. We're your family. We've always looked out for you. I gave a short, humorless laugh. Looked out for me? Or looked out for my money? The flush that crept up his neck told me I'd hit home. Julia straightened her spine. If you really think we'd steal from you, then I don't know what to say. But you're making a mistake cutting us out like this. It's not healthy. What's not healthy, I said quietly, is letting people strip you bare while you smile and pretend you don't notice. Eric stood abruptly, shoving his hands into his pockets. So that's it? You've already decided we're guilty? I've decided, I said, rising to meet his height, that my trust is no longer yours to use. He stared at me for a long moment, his breath shallow. You're going to regret this. I felt the old ache in my chest, not from fear, but from knowing how far the boy I raised had drifted. No, Eric, I said softly. For the first time in years, I won't. Julia gave a sharp exhale, as if she were about to say something, then thought better of it. Eric turned toward the door. They left without another word, the cold air rushing in for a moment before I closed it behind them. For a long time, I stood with my hand on the doorknob, feeling the vibrations of their departure fade. They had come to reclaim control. Instead, they'd walked out with less than they arrived, and I intended to keep it that way. The next morning, I called the locksmith. He arrived just after 10, a wiry man in his 60s with quick, capable hands and a quiet manner. Front and back doors? He asked. All of them, I said. And I want deadbolts that can't be opened from the outside without a key. No spare keys left under mats or flower pots. He gave me a knowing look, but didn't ask questions. By the time he was done, the old brass knobs Harold had installed decades ago were gone, replaced by solid steel locks that clicked shut with finality. He handed me 3 keys. I put one in my pocket, one in the lockbox in the shed, and the third in a small envelope addressed to Chloe. Next came the documents. I pulled every file from my desk and laid them out across the dining room table. Insurance policies, property deeds, medical records, tax returns. I went through each one, removing anything that bore Eric's name or gave him access. The will Michael and I had revised earlier in the week was still waiting for my signature at his office. I made a note to stop by tomorrow. For now, I drafted a letter, sealed and dated, stating clearly that Eric Lawson was to have no control over my finances, property, or medical decisions. I placed it with the rest of my important papers. In the early afternoon, I phoned my homeowner's insurance provider. Add a security rider, I told them, and note that no one is authorized to access my property without my written consent. They asked if something had happened. I gave them the simplest answer. Just taking precautions. When I hung up, I walked through the house slowly, room by room. It felt different already, not because of the locks or the papers, but because I'd drawn a line and put myself on the right side of it. In the living room, I paused in front of the old oak cabinet where Harold used to keep his ledgers. On the top shelf was a shoebox full of photographs. Eric in overalls, holding his first fishing rod. Eric at 16, proudly showing me the driver's license he'd just earned. Eric on his wedding day, his arm tight around Julia's waist. I closed the box gently. The boy in those pictures wasn't the man who'd stood in my living room yesterday. And I couldn't spend the rest of my life trying to bring him back. Just before dusk, my phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. Dad's furious. Says you've locked him out of your life. Do you want me to come over? Not tonight, I replied. But soon, I'm all right. The truth was, I was more than all right. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. I made myself a cup of tea and carried it to the kitchen window. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving a thin, clean layer over the yard. No footprints, no tracks. It struck me then. This was how I wanted my life to look from here on. Quiet, intact, untouched by anyone who thought my trust was theirs to take. I sipped slowly, letting the warmth spread through me. Tomorrow I'd sign the will, and that would be the last piece of the wall I was building between myself and Eric. And once it was up, I wasn't letting him find a single crack. Sunday afternoon brought a pale winter sun and the smell of wood smoke drifting from the neighbor's chimney. I was in the middle of folding laundry when a familiar knock sounded. 2 short taps, a pause, then one more. When I opened the door, there stood Evelyn Harper, my neighbor of 30 years, with a covered plate in her hands. "Baked you an apple tart," she said, stepping inside before I could protest. "Made too much for just me." We'd shared 1,000 little visits like this over the years, trading pies for tomatoes, swapping recipes, sitting on each other's porches on summer nights. But today, I felt an odd relief at the sight of her, as if she were a lifeline thrown across a widening gap. I set the tart on the counter and poured us both tea. We sat in the kitchen, steam curling up between us. Evelyn studied me for a moment, then said, "You've been quiet lately, not like you." I hesitated, then decided there was no reason to hide the truth from her. "Eric and Julia have been overstepping," I said carefully. "I had to make some changes, big ones." Her eyes narrowed. "Overstepping how?" I told her about the safe, the missing items, the bank transfers, the meeting in my living room. I didn't embellish, didn't dramatize, just the facts. When I finished, she shook her head slowly. I wish I could say I was surprised. That made me look up. "You're not?" Evelyn sighed. "I've watched them, Martha. The way they swoop in when they want something, then vanish when they don't. Harold never would have stood for it." The mention of Harold's name made my throat tighten, but it wasn't grief so much as the reminder of what it felt like to have someone in your corner without conditions. "I've locked things down now," I said. "Change the will, change the locks, shut off their access." "Good," she said firmly. "Don't you dare feel guilty about that." "I don't feel guilty," I admitted. "I feel lighter. But there's a part of me that still wonders how it came to this." Evelyn reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "You gave them too much trust for too long. And some people mistake trust for weakness. You're not weak, Martha. You just didn't want to see what was right in front of you." Her words sat with me like a stone in still water, sinking deep, settling there. We drifted to other topics after that. Her brother's hip surgery, the rumor about the hardware store changing owners, the small things that stitch a life together. But under it all, I felt a quiet current of strength, like a hand pressed firmly against my back. When Evelyn left, she hugged me a second longer than usual. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "Don't let them make you think otherwise." After she'd gone, I cut myself a slice of her tart and sat by the window. The late sunlight glinted off the snow, turning it gold in places. Across the yard, Evelyn's kitchen light came on, and I could see her moving around, busy with her own small routines. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely alone in this. There were still people who saw me, not for what I could give, but for who I was. And that, I realized, was worth more than anything in that empty safe. It was just after lunch on Wednesday when I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I peeked through the lace curtain, I saw Chloe's little blue hatchback. She got out carrying a grocery bag and, to my surprise, a thick manila folder tucked under her arm. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and her breath came in little clouds as she hurried to the porch. "Hi, Grandma," she said when I opened the door. "I brought you a few things, and I need to talk to you." We set the groceries on the counter: bread, milk, a jar of my favorite orange marmalade. I raised an eyebrow at her. "This is more than just a visit." Chloe nodded, pulling off her scarf. "You're right. I overheard something the other night." I felt my stomach tighten. "What sort of something?" She opened the folder and slid a few papers toward me. They were bank printouts, not mine, but clearly Eric's. Transfers, withdrawals, and a large pending payment flagged for review. "I wasn't snooping," she said quickly. "I was using Dad's laptop to print a paper for school. These popped up in the print queue. And then I heard them in the kitchen talking about you." I stayed silent, letting her go on. "They were saying you've overreacted and that you'll calm down eventually. Dad told Julia not to worry, that he'd get back in somehow. He said you wouldn't be able to manage everything without him." My jaw tightened. "And what did Julia say?" "She laughed," Chloe said flatly. "Said you were too sentimental to cut them off completely. That it's just a matter of time." I took a slow breath. It was one thing to suspect, another to hear it confirmed in your own granddaughter's voice. Chloe leaned forward. "Grandma, I think you need to change more than just the locks. You should move your valuables, all of them, somewhere they can't get to. And maybe think about a safety deposit box at the bank. I'll take you if you want." I looked at her for a long moment. She wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't trying to soften me up before a request. She was offering help with no strings attached. "Why are you doing this, Chloe?" I asked quietly. Her eyes softened. "Because you've always been there for me. And I don't want to see you get hurt any more than you already have." For a moment, I had to turn away, busying myself with the kettle so she wouldn't see the shine in my eyes. "You're a good girl," I said finally. "Your parents may not like what I'm doing, but I'm not going back on it." "I didn't think you would," she said, smiling faintly. "But you should be ready for them to push harder. They won't just let this go." We spent the next hour going over what I still had in the house: jewelry, old savings bonds, a few keepsakes with more sentimental than monetary value. She helped me wrap each piece in tissue and label it, ready to be moved to the bank vault. Before she left, she paused at the door. "Grandma, if they ever show up here angry or try to pressure you, call me first. Don't deal with them alone." I promised I would, though in truth I didn't plan on giving Eric or Julia another chance to step foot inside. After she drove away, I sat at the kitchen table with the manila folder in front of me. Seeing their schemes laid out in black and white gave me a strange sense of calm. They still thought they knew me. Still thought I was the same woman who handed over checks at the first sign of need. But that woman was gone. And the one sitting here now had no intention of letting them through another door, real or metaphorical, without a key they'd never get again. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, just as I'd settled into my armchair with a fresh cup of tea and a library book. No phone call, no polite knock. The sharp rattle of my front doorknob made me look up. Then came the sound of keys, several of them, trying one lock after another. My heart didn't pound. Instead, it went strangely steady. I set the teacup down, rose, and walked to the door. The moment I opened it, Eric was there, his coat unbuttoned, breath steaming in the cold. Julia stood just behind him, arms crossed, her eyes sharp. "Your keys won't work anymore," I said, my voice calm. "I noticed," Eric replied tightly. "Why did you change the locks?" "I think you know why." He let out a humorless laugh. "This is ridiculous. We're your family, Mom. We shouldn't be locked out of your life. Yet here you are, trying to get in without my permission." I leaned against the doorframe, making no move to invite them inside. Julia stepped forward. "We just came to talk. Face to face. This cold shoulder routine is childish." "I think stealing from your own mother is childish," I said evenly. "And I'm done pretending otherwise." Eric's eyes flashed. "You can't seriously believe." "I do believe it. I believe it because I saw the empty safe with my own eyes. I believe it because the bank flagged your transfer attempts. And I believe it because I know the difference between help and exploitation. Something you've long since stopped caring about." He ran a hand through his hair, his breath coming faster. "So you've made up your mind. That's it?" "Yes," I said simply. "That's it?" Julia's voice turned silky. "Martha, think about what you're doing. This will tear the family apart. People will talk." "Let them," I said. "I'd rather be the woman who protected herself than the woman who was too afraid of gossip to act." Eric took a step closer, lowering his voice as if that might make it more persuasive. "We can fix this. Give me the power of attorney back, and I'll make sure everything is handled properly. No more mistakes." I shook my head. "No more access." The wind picked up, sending a swirl of snow across the porch. Julia pulled her coat tighter, her lips thinning. "You'll regret this, Martha. One day you'll need us, and we won't be there." "Julia," I said quietly, "if that day comes, it will mean I've forgotten who you are. I don't plan on doing that." For a moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the wind and the faint creak of the porch boards under Eric's shifting weight. Finally, he muttered something I didn't catch, turned, and went down the steps. Julia followed, but not before giving me one last look, not of sadness, but of calculation. I closed the door and locked both deadbolts. My hands didn't shake. In fact, they felt steadier than they had in weeks. Back in the living room, my tea was still warm. I picked it up and returned to my chair, the book still open to the page I'd left. Outside, I heard the sound of their car starting, then fading down the road. They'd tried to force the door today. Next time, I knew it wouldn't be the door they'd go after. But whatever their next move, I was ready. I'd built my boundaries high and set them deep, and I had no intention of letting them be breached. The following Tuesday, Chloe pulled into my driveway right on time, her little blue car crunching over the thin layer of frost. She hopped out, cheeks flushed from the cold, and gave me a brisk hug. "Ready?" she asked, glancing at the tote bag at my feet. Inside the bag, carefully wrapped in tissue and bubble wrap, were the last of the valuables I still kept in the house. Harold's watch, my mother's wedding ring, a small box of savings bonds, and the envelopes of photographs I wasn't willing to risk losing. The tote wasn't heavy, but it felt weighty in a different way, as if I were carrying the final pieces of my old life into a vault. We drove in companionable silence to the bank. When we walked in, Susan, the branch manager, spotted me immediately. "Mrs. Lawson," she said warmly, "we've got the paperwork for your safety deposit box all ready." She led us to the small private room where the vault was located. The steel door loomed at the far end, a solid barrier between the outside world and what would soon be mine alone. "You've rented a medium-sized box," Susan explained, pulling the long drawer-like container from its slot. "Plenty of space for jewelry, documents, and keepsakes. You'll be the only one with access. No co-signers, no exceptions." I nodded, more relieved than I expected to feel. Chloe helped me unwrap each item, placing them neatly inside. Harold's watch went in first, its worn leather strap coiled like a sleeping snake. Then my mother's ring, gleaming faintly under the fluorescent lights. When the box was nearly full, I added one last thing, a short, handwritten note folded into an envelope. On the outside, I'd written, "To be opened by Chloe only, if I am gone." Inside were the details of my accounts, my lawyer's contact information, and a few lines explaining exactly why I'd taken these steps. Once everything was in place, Susan slid the box back into its slot and turned the key. The sound of the lock clicking home felt like the closing of a chapter. Back in the car, Chloe glanced over at me. "Feel better?" I exhaled slowly. "Safer, that's the word." She smiled faintly. "You know, they're going to hate this." "I know," I said, "but I'm not doing it to spite them. I'm doing it because I won't live in fear of my own family." We stopped for coffee on the way back. Sitting by the window of the little cafe, I watched people bustle along the sidewalk, scarves wrapped tight against the wind. Life was going on as it always had, indifferent to my small personal war. And yet, inside, I felt a sense of ground regained. When Chloe dropped me off, she lingered in the doorway. "You're sure you don't want me to stay a bit, just in case they show up again?" I smiled. "If they do, the locks will hold, and so will I." After she left, I stood in my quiet kitchen, the tote bag now empty on the counter. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel like it held anything they could take from me. They could rattle the locks. They could make their calls. They could gossip, threaten, and plead. But what mattered most, my dignity, my security, my choice, was now behind a door they'd never open. And I intended to keep it that way. It started with the phone calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I let them go to voicemail, but when I finally listened, the pattern became clear. First was my sister-in-law, Claire. "Martha, I don't know what's going on, but Eric says you've cut him off completely. That doesn't sound like you. Can we talk?" Then Harold's cousin, David. "Martha, families have disagreements, but you can't just shut the door forever. Think about your grandchildren." By the third message, a neighbor I barely knew, I understood exactly what Eric was doing. He was using other people as messengers, hoping they'd wear me down, make me feel cornered. I didn't answer any of them. 2 days later, Evelyn knocked on my door, holding a basket of muffins. "Martha," she said carefully, "I just came from the store, and I ran into Claire. She told me Eric's been saying you're not well, that you're confused and making rash decisions." I let out a dry laugh. Confused enough to change my locks, move my valuables, and update my will? That's quite the diagnosis. Evelyn frowned. "He's trying to get people on his side." "I know," I said, "and I'm letting him try." Every person he drags into this sees him more clearly than he realizes. That evening, the phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a name I knew well, Margaret, my oldest friend from church. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Martha," she began, "Eric came to see me. He says you've misunderstood something about a safe and some money." "Margaret," I interrupted gently. I know exactly what happened. I'm not confused, and I'm not changing my mind. There was a pause. So it's true? You've really cut him off? Yes, I said simply. And I won't discuss the details because they're mine to keep. But I will say this. No one accidentally empties a safe or tries to move money out of someone else's account. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice. She sighed. I had to ask. He made it sound like. I know how he makes things sound, I said. It's how he's always gotten what he wants. The next day, I took an extra step. I called Michael, my lawyer, and told him to draft a letter for Eric. Formal, dated, and crystal clear. It stated that he was to have no involvement in my finances, property, or personal matters, now or in the future. Copies would go to the bank, the insurance company, and the county clerk. When Michael read it back to me, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. Make sure it's sent by registered mail, I said, and keep a copy in your files. By the end of the week, the outside pressure slowed. The calls became fewer, the voicemails shorter. Either Eric was realizing his campaign wasn't working, or he was regrouping for another attempt. On Saturday morning, I sat by the kitchen window with my tea, watching the snow melt in patches across the yard. Evelyn's cat slinked along the fence, its tail flicking. Somewhere down the street, a child laughed. The world was peaceful, and so was I. I knew Eric still had my phone number, my address, and a whole arsenal of manipulations he might try. But I also knew something more important. I was no longer reachable in the way that mattered to him. The door was closed. The locks were changed. The bank box was full. And my mind was made up. If he wanted a mother who could be persuaded, guilted, or bullied, he'd have to look elsewhere, because this one was done. The first warm day of March came early that year. The snow that had covered my yard for months was melting into soft, muddy patches, and the air smelled faintly of damp earth. I opened the kitchen window for the first time since autumn, letting the fresh air move through the house. It felt like breathing differently, deeper, clearer. I spent the morning tidying cupboards, moving slowly, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to take my time. Every dish, every folded tablecloth, every photograph in its frame was mine. Mine to keep, mine to protect. No one was circling, waiting for me to leave a door unlocked. Around noon, I made tea and carried it to the back porch. The boards were still cold under my slippers, but the sun felt warm on my face. Across the yard, the lilac bushes stood bare, but I could already see the smallest hints of green pushing through. I thought about the winter I'd just come through. Not the one outside, the one inside these walls. The frost between me and my son. The chill of realizing that love isn't always enough to keep people honest. The slow, steady decision to put my safety and dignity before someone else's comfort. There had been moments in the early days when I'd questioned myself. Was I being too harsh? Would this tear the family beyond repair? But each step I'd taken, the locks, the bank, the will, the vault, had made the air a little easier to breathe. I hadn't done it out of spite. I'd done it because there comes a time when you must stand for yourself the way you once stood for everyone else. The phone was inside, sitting silent on the kitchen table. I didn't need to check it to know that the absence of Eric's number was its own kind of peace. Chloe still called. Evelyn still visited. Life went on, trimmed down to the people who showed up without an angle. In the quiet, I realized something I hadn't been able to see before. Losing what you thought you could never lose can sometimes return to you the one thing you truly need: yourself. I sipped my tea, listening to the soft drip of snowmelt from the eaves. A sparrow landed on the fence, tilting its head as if to take me in. The sun warmed my shoulders. I had no illusions that Eric would suddenly change or that Julia would see herself clearly in any mirror. That wasn't mine to control. What was mine, my home, my security, my say over my own life, was now firmly in my hands, and I intended to keep it there. If you've read this far, maybe you know a little of what I've learned. Maybe you've felt that same shift when you stop asking why someone has hurt you and start deciding what you're going to do about it. So here's what I'll tell you. Protect yourself. Don't wait for permission. Don't let love be the excuse someone uses to reach into your life and take what isn't theirs. You get to lock your own doors, and you never have to hand over the key.